strength and fitness world, there's, for lack of a better word, an obsession with getting bigger. And I can't say that I'm not a part of contributing to that obsession. Heck, I even have a whole video dedicated to the concept of getting bigger for arm wrestling. And considering what the general goals are for people in strength sports, it perfectly makes sense. When you realize that size is pretty much the most reliable factor for indicating strength, there's a little reason why you wouldn't want to get bigger if your goal is to get stronger.
You need to get bigger.
But the way you go about doing this can vary a lot. If you've been in a fitness circle for a while, you've probably have heard of the term bulking, which basically refers to eating in a caloric surplus for the purpose of gaining size. Now, size can come in a couple ways. You can get size from muscle, which is probably what most of us are aiming for, unless you're a sumo wrestler, in which case those guys are also looking to put on a good amount of fat. But for a sport like arm wrestling, with weight classes, unless you're an open class puller, you want to keep most of your size gains limited to muscle gains. Which brings us to body fat. No matter how much you try to prevent it, you will still gain body fat while you're on a bulk. But how much of it you gain is the thing I want to discuss later on. Lastly, you can gain some weight and size from water, especially when you're on a diet that's high in salt and carbs. You're gonna retain much more water than if you were not on such a diet. And also, if you're on creatine, that helps to draw water into your muscles, which sometimes does help to make them look bigger. But back to the topic of gaining muscle versus body fat. It is true that the more you eat, the more muscle you will put on. But here's the disclaimer. The rate in which you put on fat is going to increase exponentially quicker than the rate in which you put on muscle. Sure, you can go balls to the wall with a dirty bulk and gain like an extra 2 pounds more muscle at the end of your 16-week massing phase, but is gaining that extra 30 pounds or so more fat really worth it? For some people, it is, and more power to you if you're in that camp. But for the majority of people, I don't think that's the best idea. If you're normally competing at the 154 class, well, sure, maybe now with that extra muscle you've gotten, you've reached a competitive 176 level. But because of the amount of fat you've put on, now you're gonna have to compete in the 198 class, and that's a whole nother level of strength that you just don't have yet. So now what? You basically have two choices. Continue to bulk and hope your strength gains somehow catch up as you get heavier and heavier into the weight classes, which honestly is not going to happen unless you're an absolute beginner to the sport, in which case it might be possible to milk those newbie gains for a fair amount of time. Or you have to dedicate a couple of weeks or months to lose all that unnecessary fat that you put on to get back down to a more reasonable weight for your strength level. There's also sort of a third choice where you just continue to bulk, but you can still choose to compete against people of the same level, but not necessarily the same size. But unless your last name's Larratt, most of us don't have the luxury of that choice. So, to avoid this conundrum, how fast exactly should you gain? Well, once again, we have Dr. Mike Ezratel from Renaissance Periodization for a pretty good recommendation, and here's what he has to say.
I think that you should gain at somewhere between half a pound to a pound per week in the typical mass gaining phase. Half a pound to a pound per week, half a pound if you're on the more fat phobic side, if you're on the smaller side, if you're a 130-pound girl, half a pound per week is great. If you're on the larger side, you are okay with putting on a bit of extra fat. If it means a little bit more muscle, gaining up to a pound a week is totally cool. Let's say it's a 12-week massing phase. That's 3 months of intentional weight gain. That's a lot. You're going to gain a lot of muscle. But you're only doing half a pound per week. That's 6 pounds gained. 6 pounds you can lose in 2 or 3 weeks of fat loss dieting right after.
I strongly encourage you to watch the full video by Dr. Mike, as well as his other video on clean versus dirty bulking, before you start your bulking journey. There's tons of great information and advice that I personally have used and incorporated into my own programs in the past. Other than size, I also wanted to talk about becoming too big too fast in another sense. I'm sure many of you, like myself, have been following Auden's progression, especially over the past year, and his popularity has been skyrocketing. Just looking at the objective numbers from the King of the Table 10 videos posted by Core Sports, it's not even close. The match between Auden and the Whisperer has almost as many views as all the other matches on the card combined. NANI? And we're seeing the same thing with the Challenger Series match, where Auden's match poster has the most likes by far. Along with this popularity comes a huge amount of influence. You can see it exemplified extremely clearly with Auden's dad. Just take a look at how much the pronation and rising lifts are posted and talked about every single day on social media. Even I've had to make videos on those topics just to stay relevant. And with this huge amount of influence, there comes a big amount of responsibility. When you're that popular, people are going to listen to you and take your word as gospel. And that is dangerous. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say what Auden has been doing is right or not, because frankly, I don't know. I am not him, nor am I his coach. And either way, it's not really my place to say so. But what I'm going to say is that what works for Auden or Devon or whatever big influencer you're watching might not necessarily work for you. Have you been arm wrestling ever since you were a kid, or have a world champion mentoring you during your training? For most of you watching this video, I think the answer is no. So my point is this: don't take everything you see at face value. Even for me, I make mistakes all the time. I don't have all the answers, but what I do have is a brain that can think and do research and ask questions. And that is fundamentally what I want to impart on the arm wrestling community: the skill to think critically. Guys, this was such an important video to me just because this is something I've wanted to say for such a long time now, but I just never had the chance to say so. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about the topics I covered today, both about the size part and the popularity part. And for those of you looking to take your arm wrestling to the next level, I've just recently revamped my coaching page on my website, eastsidearmwrestling.com. Go check it out. I have live and online coaching available, as well as one-time video and text consultations if you need some quick answers. Guys, it's Greg, and I'll see you guys in the next one.